founder of Bitcoin Beach. How many years has it been since you kicked off Bitcoin Beach?
So it was 2019. At that time, it was the murder capital of the world. The people there have always just been so amazingly warm and genuine and very hardworking, but it just didn't come together in the right mix, and they were being held back.
How would you characterize the progress that you've seen?
The town is just booming. You're also seeing other communities. There's Berlin that has tried to replicate what's happened in El Zonte. We were able to start in a very small community, and that's where a lot of circular economies failed. We came across this individual that wanted to donate Bitcoin to the project that we were doing.
I'm fascinated if they had a relationship with El Salvador. What was that relationship?
Archie.
Mike Peterson, what a great pleasure it is to have you here, founder of Bitcoin Beach.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. We actually got some beautiful weather this year. The past few years of this conference, it's been raining the whole time.
So we're in Lugano for people watching and listening to this. Are you a regular at this conference?
This is the third year here. Yeah.
So yeah, I came here 3 years ago and it's beautiful weather. You know, I have been to El Salvador once.
Okay. How long ago?
It was 4 years ago.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to remember. I think it was in 2022. So 3 years ago.
It's crazy how much has changed since then. You got to come back and visit again.
Yeah, people keep telling me because when we went there, it was just after the cleanup of all the crime and the gangs. And I didn't even know that had happened, to be honest. And strange because I do post all the news and whatever, but I was just oblivious to that for some reason. And yet I wasn't aware of El Salvador's reputation either. Because once I was there, I texted my brother, where are you? I'm in El Salvador. He goes, you shouldn't have gone there, bro. Because he's also a bit sore because I haven't visited him in quite some time. And I'm like, why? It's the murder capital of the world. I said, mate, we had the most amazing time that, that title could not be further from our complete and total experience, that there was not even a moment of trepidation where we thought, boy, that was a close call with something that could have gone wrong, or even anything remotely threatening. And, we went through back streets of El Zonte, you know that better than anybody. And 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know what it's like now, but, there wasn't that much street lighting. Right.
I mean, it's actually, there's been so much development that a lot of those are lit up now. But the nice thing is you used to have to be careful where you went at night. Now you go anywhere. I don't mind getting lost. You don't worry about your safety.
I'm really curious about where your story with El Salvador started.
So my story with El Salvador started back in, I think it was late 2005, went down to El Salvador on a surf trip and kind of just because it had the cheapest tickets. We were looking to go someplace warm, and I'd never been to El Salvador, so I went there on a surf trip and really fell in love with the country. Just the people were, so warm. Even at that time, the gang problems weren't as bad as it got, it got progressively bad over the next 10 years after that. But at that time, there was gangs there, but the people were just super friendly. And so I called my wife up and said, we've got to come back here and buy a place. So we bought a place in El Salvador, then I think 3 months later. And we would just go down there for vacation every year. And it was, anywhere from a couple weeks to a few months. We had a seasonal business in the US, so we had a lot of flexibility with our schedule and started getting to know a lot of people that were working in churches or children's homes or doing different work there in El Salvador. At that time, it was the murder capital of the world. A lot of challenges. And so we thought, hey, we have some flexibility with our schedule in the US. Why don't we move down here full time and, kind of use our winter season that we have off to kind of pour into some of these people that are doing these amazing things there. And actually, we're here now with some of our best friends. We met them there in El Salvador. He actually got shot in the neck there his first year they were working there. So it was, that's the kind of environment that it was.
Looking for a secure, trusted way to buy, sell, and hold Bitcoin? Gemini has been leading the way since 2014. Founded by the Winklevoss twins to be a security-first, fully regulated Bitcoin platform, with Gemini, your Bitcoin is protected with enterprise-grade security, backed by insurance and Type 2 certifications for both SOC 1 and SOC 2. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or a long-time hodler, Gemini gives you the tools to stack sats and build generational wealth your way. From simple one-tap buys to advanced charts and trading features, it's all here. Buy, sell, and hold securely. That's Gemini. Gemini, Bitcoin with confidence. The DeBiFi prepaid Visa card is here. Just borrow against your Bitcoin, load US dollars onto your card, and pay instantly. No banks, no selling your Bitcoin. Just secure, short-term loans backed by your Bitcoin. Ready to spend with your DeBiFi prepaid Visa card. It's also non-custodial. Your keys, your Bitcoin, always. Get cash, keep your Bitcoin upside, and spend it anywhere. That's DeBiFi. Bitcoin-backed loans, now in your wallet. What made you want to look through that and find it such a compelling place to move to?
The people there have always just been so amazingly warm and genuine. I've traveled quite a bit, and most places you go in the world, either people are standoffish or they're really friendly because they want something from you. In El Salvador, people were just genuinely nice. And so I just really sensed that there was a lot of potential in that country, but they're being held back by, the gang violence and poverty and the other things that they've kind of historically struggled with.
Well, may I ask where you settled into first? Because I only really know of El Zonte and then the capital.
So actually, El Zonte was where we wound up buying our house right off the bat. Mm-hmm. We had been in El Tunco, which is a little bit south or east of there on the beach, was where we were on our first trip. But when we went back and we're looking at properties, we found one in El Zonte. And so, that's a lot of people now know it as Bitcoin Beach. But yeah, El Zonte. So we've been there for, I think, close to 20 years now.
I've got a Twitter friend, Macroscope17, who's a long-time American investor based in New York, many decades of experience. And he went there, and his experience and his impressions perfectly mirrored mine, and particularly about the enthusiasm and the rapid rate of change and development. So he's been there 3 times since his first time. So he's been able to mark out and observe the changes. I haven't yet, but everybody's pretty much says the same things. Like all of the reportage is corroborated by multiple people, and it's all the same experience. Hope, fast pace of change, incredibly welcoming and hospitable people. And so what a fantastic combination.
And very hardworking too. Some places I've traveled quite a bit, and some places you go in the world, you're like, I don't know if this place is ever going to develop because it seems, there's not the work ethic there, or there's different things missing. El Salvador always seemed like it had all the right ingredients, but it just didn't come together in the right mix, and they were being held back.
So 20 years, you've had a very strong relationship with El Salvador, and then somewhere along the way, Bitcoin comes onto the scene. How does that catch your attention?
Yeah, so we moved down there full time, I think in 2014, and we were working in the community. We were really trying to keep kids out from joining the gangs. The gangs were a huge issue there, and so we were working in El Zonte with a community project. And in 2019, somebody came to me. We were doing like a retreat for a lot of the other people that work there with NGOs and churches. And we had a speaker come down, and one of the speakers that came down for this retreat knew that I was one of those crazy Bitcoiner people. And he said, hey, we had somebody donate a Bitcoin to our organization. How can we use it? So I kind of went through different ways that they could use the Bitcoin. And a few months later, he contacted me out of the blue and said, hey, do you want to meet the person who donated this Bitcoin to see if they want to help with what you guys are doing in El Salvador? And I thought, wow, what we're doing is so different than what they were doing. And I thought they probably wouldn't, want to be involved. But I was just kind of curious as why was somebody donating Bitcoin? And
so you were already into Bitcoin at the point of
yeah.
How did you even notice Bitcoin, and why did it catch your attention?
I mean, I was an economics major in university. Always been a libertarian. Big Ayn Rand fan. And so I was like, when I heard there was this money that wasn't controlled by state, of course, it piqued my interest. I went through the normal things of like, oh, this kind of seems like a Ponzi scheme, and, what actually gives it value. I didn't understand the technical aspects about it and the breakthroughs of, why it couldn't just be multiplied, the number of Bitcoin in existence and all of those, that people go through. And went down the rabbit hole and really was like, no, this is amazing. But I didn't really see the crossover with the work we were doing in El Salvador. There was a number of times where I thought it'd be so much easier if we could use Bitcoin because, we were trying to buy property or a pickup truck or things, just trying to get money into the country. The banks in El Salvador are horrendous. And so I thought, man, it'd be so much easier if we could just use Bitcoin. And then when we came across this, individual that wanted to wound up wanting to donate Bitcoin to the projects that we were doing, I was like, this is amazing. We can, really make the world's first kind of circular Bitcoin economy in El Zonte. And I knew it had kind of all the natural elements to it.
So, I mean, not wanting to pry too much into the privacy of this donor, but I'm fascinated if they had a relationship with El Salvador. What was that relationship, or what was the interest in El Salvador that prompted them to make such a donation?
Yeah, no relationship with El Salvador, but they really believed, like, firmly that it was the actual using Bitcoin as money that would make a difference in people's lives. And so they were looking to donate to organizations that were willing to use Bitcoin as money. And most NGOs were like, well, we'll trade it out for fiat, but we're not going to use Bitcoin. And so when we brought them this proposal that, yeah, we'll actually use Bitcoin on the ground, we'll try to get businesses going, we'll, start paying the kids to do small tasks in Bitcoin. And we kind of gave them this whole outline of a plan of how we would build a circular economy. They came back and said, all right, let's do it.
You said you're a libertarian, or you had actually a libertarian framework in your worldview. How did you acquire that? Was it purely through your education, through economics, or how did you come about that? Because I'm not particularly ideological.
I'm not sure. I just, from a very young age, I had I think I have just a pushback against authority.
Yeah.
So I had this sense of when the government told me I couldn't I was very entrepreneurial as a young kid, and you'd run into different government regulations. You can't do that, and that always infuriated me. What do you mean I can't do this? This is on my parents' own property, and I can't do this. And so I think I just kind of grew up feeling that government was too intrusive into our lives, and that it was actually harmful rather than beneficial. And yeah, probably some of my early, like I said, Ayn Rand was one of my favorite authors. I think I read her first book in 6th grade. And so from a young age, I also am a very strong Christian too. And sometimes those two beliefs, clash with each other. And so I wrestled through those things.
I was going to ask about that because, I mean, maybe it's a bias that I have, but it's not something I perceive as, I don't perceive libertarianism and too many people going to church being libertarians, but I could be mistaken because I don't go to church. I don't know too many people in church. So
I don't, a lot of times people think that they would be in conflict. I don't think that they're in conflict. I think that it's not government's responsibility to take care of the poor and to be involved in these things. It's our personal responsibility. And so I think that's the differentiating when a lot of people think oh, we need the government to do this, we need the government to do that. And I think when government gets involved, it usually is very wasteful. A lot of times, because you have people not using their own money, they're not wise about how the programs are outlined, where when you have people that are using their own resources to, pour into people's lives, it makes a much bigger difference. And so I think that we have this personal responsibility.
I agree with that. Do you not think government is an expression of the collective will of society, people?
I do think that it is, but I think that it can be, and I'm not, when I say I'm not some libertarians go, take it to the extreme of they don't, anarchists, they don't want any government, and I wouldn't say that I'm on that in agreement with that. I'm more am very much in agreement. I think of the way that the founding fathers of the U.S. saw having very limited government. We have government do the things that are just more productive for an entity to do, but stay out of everything else.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although, it's very hard to come to a consensus agreement in society. And I guess that's what the political battle is all about, isn't it?
Living in El Salvador, sometimes you realize even some of what you think are your beliefs that, you don't want the government to say what you can and can't do. That can be changed when you're living in a neighborhood where they don't have any zoning and you have businesses right next door to your house and there's no sound regulations and, they're playing music in the middle of the night. And so, I think even living in El Salvador, sometimes I've kind of wrestled with those things. Well, sometimes you want there to be some regulations,
sure.
When you're in agreement with them. And so, you have to realize, kind of irony of that.
Well, we're seeing the benefit of effective government policy in El Salvador,
yeah.
profoundly transforming the country. But there comes a point where, like, the private sector does need to kick in once it's developed to a point, and then people are free to participate and shape their own country. But I guess from a libertarian point of view, does that start with good government policy providing a governance framework?
I think that the first thing you need is to have security. If there's not security, if you have people that can steal from you and you have no, recourse to that, and we saw that firsthand in El Salvador, the majority of the way gangs controlled people was through extortion. And so, almost every business there was paying off the gangs, and they kind of lived in this constant fear, and it really held everything back. And so, I saw kind of firsthand that was a role for, some type of coming together of society to agree we need to enforce security measures.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's through government or, in other countries have, or people have done that in other ways, but you need to have some type of community action, because if it's kind of everybody for themselves, it makes it very easy for the gangs to kind of control things.
So you got the Bitcoin, the donation, I mean. And so presumably you have a sort of organizing background through the church and you've got community outreach skills and competencies throughout your. Did you have an organization at the time?
Yeah, we had an organization. We were primarily working with supporting different missionaries that were working in El Salvador, and so that was kind of more behind the scenes. And then we kind of branched out from that to doing more direct work in the community through local Salvadorans like Roman, who I think you had on your podcast before. A lot of people know him as Chimbera, and another close friend, Jorge, that was involved in the early days. And so, so we kind of shifted gears, but I try to stay behind the scenes as much as possible. I think it's important to have, locals from the community, the ones that are actually doing the work, that they're kind of the face of things.
And so how do you kick off a circular economy? How do you get it started? How do you get people interested in that? Because I would assume that, not too many people at El Zonte Beach were concerned with this new monetary phenomenon, and they're like, why are you bothering us with this, Mike? How is this going to change our life? How do you convince them to participate in a project, such an experimental one at that?
I mean, a big part of it was their lack of alternatives. And so I think, just in all honesty, that made them more open to it, because there was so much poverty. And this was a chance, specifically with the young people we were working with, to earn resources, and so they had no other jobs available. And so we were paying them in Bitcoin to clean the beach or to clean the river, or to giving them stipends for doing well in school. And this was the first time they were actually able to earn, something that they could turn around and buy something with. So on that side, they were willing to look into it because of that. For a lot of the stores, they want to accept the money people have. And so once they saw that these young people started earning Bitcoin, and we onboarded a couple, we had to, push them a little bit, and hey, we'll make sure this works out for you. But then once they kind of understood that this was a global asset, they became more open to it. And then COVID hit. And during COVID, it really opened the opportunity to us, because when you're doing development work, you really have to be careful that you don't distort the local economy. You don't want to, have people become dependent. You don't, sometimes people come in and they give people things for free and they start working less, or they start to, develop a dependency on this. And
you already had political and economic framework in mind that made you, I would say, disposed to being receptive to Bitcoin, which is, like so many very early adopters, they were ideologically driven either from a cypherpunk perspective or from an economic, political, libertarian ideology. And it's like, yes, this is what we've been looking for all along.
It seems like you have the ones that came at more from the tech, and then the ones that came at more from the economic. And I think even now you have somewhat of a division in the Bitcoin space between those two groups, and even what they view Bitcoin should be. And I think I don't think that's something that will go away.
Well, the tech and the political ideologies came, and I think to a great extent they shaped what I would call, the retail culture around Bitcoin. And for the most part, most people definitely do sort of embrace those ethics. And now we've got corporate and institutional adoption. And I think a lot of people are kind of starting to lament the influx of their influence. But I welcome it. Now, I've told you it's good we spoke about my corporate background, because now people understand how much I absolutely detest corporate culture. But when we're talking about hyper-Bitcoinization, I just think, what else did you think was going to happen when institutions came? Did you think they were all going to abandon their suits and don hoodies, and, Larry Fink was suddenly going to be posting hodl memes and now he may confound us all and I end up doing that. But so how do you see what's happening in Bitcoin's culture now with the influx of people from the institutional world?
It's something that I wrestle with, to be honest, because it does feel like Bitcoin's less fun in that aspect. It's less rebel, less cyberpunk. And we always knew the suits would come, but I didn't really foresee the Bitcoiners becoming suits. And I feel like that's what we've seen. And I'm not knocking them for doing that. They're taking advantage of opportunities, but it does seem like even some of their motivations are being shaped by the immense amount of money that they can make. And some of them have kind of, I feel like, become more enthralled with whether it's becoming in the political sphere or just becoming wealthy in fiat terms.
Can you elaborate on that evolution? I'm interested in how, because I wasn't here for it. I have no insight into that, but I'm interested to hear if you would elaborate on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you see it even in, a lot of the people that were kind of OGs or that were early in the space, even in the way they dress, the way they talk, what they're focused on. Before it was very much freedom, money. Now they're doing Bitcoin treasury companies and talking about strategic reserves, and we needed to get governments involved. And it feels like it's been like a little bit of a shift. And I think part of that's just practical. That was going to come, but I've been kind of surprised at it's been a lot of the insiders in the Bitcoin space, like I said, donning suits rather than suits coming in and taking over the Bitcoin space.
I guess one argument is that that is an inevitability, the formation of the industry. And so would it not be better for people who have the Bitcoin ethos to facilitate that? Or do you think, have you seen an abandonment? Are they abandoning the values?
It seems a little bit, but and like I said, it may just be like a maturing of the industry, and people are growing up and just becoming more realistic about things. But I really hope that we keep the focus on freedom and actually using Bitcoin as money that's censorship resistant, that nobody else can control, rather than just seeing it as a way to make more fiat. And it does seem like, rich is corrupt. And so I think you see that. I think everybody's susceptible to that. And we'll see how it all plays out. But it does seem like some people are kind of being more drawn into, how can I make more fiat rather than how can we make Bitcoin bring in more freedom.
Well, you mentioned Bitcoin treasury companies as a kind of symptom of that. Do you see any positives in that?
Yeah, I think there are positives. I think companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, I think that just makes sense. But I think this, whole, we're just gonna, conjure more Bitcoin out of thin air, by this flywheel effect. And, MicroStrategy was able to do that to a large extent, but now you have all these other companies coming on, and, we've kind of seen that crumble pretty quickly. Maybe we'll see a resurgence in that. I'm not sure, but it does seem like it's just taking people's focus off of, like, let's get Bitcoin being used in the world. Let's make, sure that the world is driving towards a Bitcoin standard, to let's make fiat money. And I just think that is something that we're going to be challenged with.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm wondering whether or not people most of us are drawn to Bitcoin, at least initially, to some extent, and for many people, myself included, to a large extent, because of number go up. There's no doubt about that. That hype cycle draws a lot of people in. Not everybody makes it, but everybody who stays definitely makes it.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether or not many of these people who were motivated by number go up were essentially just suits waiting for their time to arrive anyway?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think it's a mix, and like I said, I'm not meaning to bash on people, but I think it's something that we need to struggle with as an industry. Is, what is the focus going to be? Because sometimes those things are in conflict, and if people are willing to surrender, freedom, if they're willing to surrender, like coming into compliance and AML and KYC and all the things that really take freedom away from Bitcoin, we're going to lose what's best about Bitcoin.
What are your thoughts on the approval of ETFs then?
I think that it was just a natural thing that was going to come. I don't necessarily think that it's a positive or negative for Bitcoin. And I think for a lot of people, it makes, a sense. I have ETFs just because I have retirement account, and it was easiest way to hold Bitcoin. At the time I was doing it, was really the only way to do it without doing a self-directed IRA, which has a bunch of... Anyways, so, I understand the practical implications, but when you hold Bitcoin that way, you lose the freedom aspects of it. And it just becomes like, you're at the mercy of a bank, basically. And so I think that because it is easier for a lot of people, it actually takes people from taking self-custody of their Bitcoin. And I think in the long run, it's going to make Bitcoin weaker.
Do you think it's necessary for people to take self-custody of all of their Bitcoin? And like, perhaps I should set that question up a little bit better, because like Bitcoin has many, many properties.
Yeah.
And the most fundamental of all is that it's censorship resistant, and a whole bunch of things or properties with Bitcoin support that aspect of it. And that's primarily the fact, that's what we want. We want it to be censorship resistant and for no one to be able to control or debase it, right? That's what we want. That certainty and that permissionless nature of it. And so, famously, it's called FU money. Government can't interfere with it, and you can do whatever you want with it. But is it necessary for someone to have all of their money allocated as FU money? Isn't it okay for some of it to be allocated as just number go up money, and then I want to use that for various things in the fiat world rather than just perpetually hold it as Bitcoin? And so as a result of that, like I look at some things like, if you're doing estate planning, maybe an ETF makes sense. If you're someone who's quite elderly and you don't have the competence to manage private keys, maybe that makes more sense. Do you see what I mean? Like there are multiple use cases, and even within your own personal allocation, even if you have perfect competence to manage your private keys, that maybe some of it doesn't need to be managed in that way. You don't need to be fighting the state with your entire portfolio allocation. It's okay. Like, for example, if I owned Apple stock, that's okay. And if I looked at Bitcoin with a part of my allocation as just, I'm looking for returns, isn't that okay too?
Yeah, I think it's okay, but I think that we run the danger of, if the majority of Bitcoin is used in that fashion, then the government has more power to come in and say, okay, you need to have state-sanctioned Bitcoin that's KYC'd, and anybody who's outside of that, we're going to have this is gray Bitcoin, or, black labeled Bitcoin that, all these other institutions are going to be prohibited from accepting. And so I think that the more Bitcoin that is captured in these companies or these formats that are susceptible to or required to be KYC AML requirements, then I think that we could lose the overall freedom aspects of Bitcoin. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not saying it very succinctly, but
no, I understand perfectly what you mean. I had a conversation with Dr. Jack Cruz. Perhaps you're familiar. I've
done a podcast with him before.
Yeah. Fascinating guy, really interesting character. That word definitely is apt for him, and I loved having a chat with him. I was very grateful for him to. We spoke in Prague earlier this year.
Okay,
it was a very enjoyable chat. And the point that he made was that some behaviors don't scale, and if we took certain behaviors as an example for everybody to replicate, Bitcoin dies. And I think he's right. He makes a perfectly valid point in that regard. But But we also then have a question of personal choice and personal circumstances as well. Like, for example, like what I do isn't necessarily, I don't necessarily have to consider what if everybody did this because it suits me.
Yeah.
So I wonder what you think about that. Like, does every behavior with respect to Bitcoin have to be considered at scale, or is that just like a community discussion?
No, I think there's going to be different things that are right for different people. Even, a lot of people are wholly against having any custodial wallets, and I would take the other side of that. I think that specifically with Lightning use, custodial wallets just tend to work better, and I think it's okay to have your spending money in a custodial wallet. Now, you don't want to hold, the lion's share of your resources in something that somebody can rug pull. And you have to be aware that if you're using a custodial wallet, that service provider could rug pull you. The government could come to them and tell them that they have to give them funds. There's lots of things that you put at risk, but it makes it easier to use. And if you're willing to lose that amount of Bitcoin, then it makes sense to use that. And so I think even when we're introducing people to Bitcoin, a lot of times their first introduction will be a custodial wallet because it's easiest. And then once they start to acquire more Bitcoin, we say, hey, these are the risks of using a custodial wallet. You really should learn, how to maintain your own keys and how to hold your Bitcoin in a more sovereign fashion. That doesn't mean that you can't still put your spending Bitcoin in a wallet. And so when it comes to investments and people thinking more longer term and with ETFs, I still am wrestling with that because I know for a lot of people, they're not going to buy Bitcoin. They're just not going to. It's just overwhelming to them, but they will put it into an ETF. And I think, you want them to be able to have that exposure to Bitcoin. So I think that is a good thing. But I also am very wary of the capture of if we have the majority of the Bitcoin held by, either governments or big financial institutions. Not obviously nobody can stop Bitcoin, but you can make it where if the majority of Bitcoin is held in a way that certain governments say this is good Bitcoin and this is bad Bitcoin, it could make it very difficult if you're outside that system to actually use that Bitcoin. So we don't want to see a system where they have that type of divide.
Well, in the last cycle, there was a guy, a Canadian investor, the Kevin O'Leary, who's on Shark Tank. Are you familiar with him? He pushed very, very hard. He
wants compliant Bitcoin.
Compliant Bitcoin that's ESG friendly because maybe he's got some bloody wind farm somewhere and he goes, maybe that will be priced at a premium because it's ESG compliant. And I'm like, you're such a dubious guy, aren't you? Like, no, it's not going to happen. I mean, I understand what he's doing. Look, he's talking his own book. He's got a portfolio of businesses and some of them.
But see, here's the difference. He's interested in making more fiat. He doesn't care about freedom. And so I think that's where we have the division of those who want to see freedom in the world and those who just want to make more fiat.
Well, that's a really interesting point because, there's this fantastic meme within Bitcoin, and I think I really do like it. It's the hodl meme, right? You want to hodl so it's that you're not paying too much attention to the fluctuations in the market value, and you're focusing on literally just creating value in the real world, and then you sweep your excess capital as savings into Bitcoin. Hopefully you can just forget about it and let Bitcoin do its own work, right? But there is a point in time where you need to make some purchases or decisions that improve the quality of life for you and your family. And one of those decisions, I don't think is a financial decision at all. And that's having a family home that you can pass down from one generation to another. So like we did not have that. So it's very important for me to be able to acquire something of significance that I can pass down. But I think the consensus within the culture is to look at these sorts of things purely as financial decisions. What's your view on that?
Actually, I hate the hodl
really?
mentality. Yeah, I think that I think it's totally contrary to what Bitcoin was supposed to be. I think we're supposed to move to a Bitcoin standard. And when you move to a Bitcoin standard, you're going to spend Bitcoin. I always tell people, if you're not spending Bitcoin, that means you're short Bitcoin because you're still holding on to fiat. So I get in this argument with people all the time. So like, why would I spend my Bitcoin? I'm like, well, why would you have anything else to spend? Like every decision you make to hold fiat versus Bitcoin, the opportunity cost of that is you're holding less Bitcoin. And so I think what people fail to understand is when you move to a Bitcoin standard and you're primarily spending in Bitcoin, it makes you reevaluate the whole way you spend money. And so you're not buying the junk. You're not buying that extra Coca-Cola. You're not buying that, something that's, you're going to throw away, in 2 weeks. You're thinking like, is this worth spending my Bitcoin on?
Mm-hmm.
And a house is definitely worth spending your Bitcoin because you can't get that time back in your life to have a house for your family, to have for your kids. In the past couple of years, we built a new house in El Zonte, and we did it all in Bitcoin. And I would have been much better off financially just holding on to that Bitcoin. But I have zero regrets because now I have a beautiful home for my family. We have all those memories there. And I can't get back that time with my kids. If I'm just going to wait till Bitcoin is worth more in fiat terms, I'll die with a bunch of Bitcoin. Big deal. What good does that do? And so I think what people sometimes lose sight of is Bitcoin isn't the end goal. Bitcoin is a tool to use to better our lives and to better the lives of others. And if we're not using it, then we're wasting it.
Jack Dorsey is a proponent of spending Bitcoin, and that if it doesn't become a standard means of exchange, that it will have effectively failed.
I 100% agree with that.
You do?
Yeah.
If Bitcoin only succeeded as a store of value, right, in a similar way to gold, you can't buy anything with gold. It's a 27 trillion market cap asset. So if Bitcoin becomes a 20, 30, 50, 100 trillion market cap asset as a store of value, why can't that be deemed a success?
Because it doesn't bring the freedom. Like gold doesn't bring, it brings some freedom. You have some sovereignty, but because you can't spend it on things, because you can't live on a gold standard, you don't have that ability to say no to the government, to basically opt out of the current system. Where if Bitcoin becomes just like gold, where it's only a store of value, the government can still control everything. They can still control the choke points of where you need to exchange gold for the currency that they control. And so if we don't have it be ubiquitous, where you can just spend Bitcoin wherever, the government's still going to have that control on us. And so we really need to see Bitcoin be used as money for it to really bring what its full promise is.
My mind drifts back to the start of sort of orange pilling El Zonte Beach as a circular economy for Bitcoin. And you convince some people. Did you start with merchants or did you start with individuals? How did you start that? Because it's kind of like, it's a circular economy. It's also, it's a circular equation to solve, isn't it? Because you need people to accept and people to actually carry it and want to pay with it. How did you kick that off?
It's like a lot of things. You have that chicken and the egg, like which comes first. And so we did them both simultaneously. We were infusing Bitcoin into the local community through the youth, for them working and getting good grades. But we also convinced some stores, some of them, like, hey, do this as a favor to us. We'll make sure it works out for you. And so we kind of had to do both simultaneously. And there was some artificialness to this. Like we had to get the momentum going to got the point now where it kind of continues on, without us needing to be involved. But you kind of have to get that going. Like with any technology, you need that network effect to kick in. And so, I think that's why we were able to make it successful in El Zonte. Is we were able to start in a very small community. And that's where a lot of circular economies fail. They want to I want to Bitcoinize Los Angeles, and I got one business here, and like 2 miles away, I have this business. It's not going to circulate. So we started in a very small community where, so you start to have the majority of the stores accept Bitcoin, and then people are willing to be paid in Bitcoin. And then merchants, the suppliers are like, okay, maybe I'll accept Bitcoin, from the stores to pay for their supplies. And so the smaller you start and then let it ripple out, that's how it can be effective.
Well, it's a classic startup model, right? So you find that it works also in a community setting like that. That's really interesting to see. And so people start using it, start accepting it. Was there a particular use case that you saw a spark within the community to say, that's where the regular transactions are happening?
I wouldn't say there's a specific, but there is one thing that I think is kind of gives a funny anecdote and gives you kind of an insight of how this opens things up to people in the developing world. Strike came down to El Salvador, and they did this promotion of, I think they were giving a certain number of sats away to every person who signed up for a wallet. And they didn't realize, in the US, you do a promotion like that, you get limited traction. In El Salvador, the amount that they were giving was like a day's wages in El Salvador. And so you had all these entrepreneurs going out, and they were, registering all these people and kind of splitting the sat bonus that they would get from them. And it wound up being this huge infusion. I think they spent way more money than they were expecting on this. But because of that, you had all these young people that for the first time had access to being able to make digital payments. And so I got a call from the guys at BitRefill, and they're saying, what is this? We're getting all these purchases for something called Free Fire. They didn't even know what it was. It was something they sold credits for. And it was a video game that was popular in El Salvador. And, you could buy in-game credits and get skins and swords. And I don't know the game, but you could get in-game things. Well, you had this whole country that never had access to that because none of them had credit cards. They never had that. So for the first time, they had access to, buying these in-game purchases. And obviously that's, not the highest use for Bitcoin, but it was, I think, eye-opening to see that this was their first entry into the digital world to participate in the global economy. And from there, it went to them being able to buy plane tickets for the first time, because before, they would have to go through a traditional travel agent and, get all these upcharges and, a lot of even flights they wouldn't have access to. Now they can buy directly, using Bitcoin to pay for things. And so I think for them, for the first time to see just the convenience of digital payments, I think for them, and not just in paying, but also in being paid, they were able to now work internationally. They could provide services for somebody in the US and be paid in sats, where before the people wouldn't hire them because it was just too difficult to actually pay them.
The Renaissance starts, as far as I am aware of what's happening in El Salvador, is when President Bukele comes into office and suddenly he warms to Bitcoin. How did that happen?
So I think, he was definitely aware of Bitcoin. I think, even before he came into office, he had tweeted some things. I think when he was the mayor, I'm not sure if it was San Salvador. Before that, he was mayor of a smaller suburb. I remember he had tweeted something about Bitcoin at one point. So he was definitely aware of it. But I think what was eye-opening for the government there is Forbes did an article on our project there. And it was, at that time, El Salvador was the murder capital of the world. Any news article about El Salvador was negative. And so this was by a major publication that was doing a positive article talking about, how Bitcoin was being used in El Zonte by people that, had historically been unbanked. And it was a very overall positive article, and it garnered a lot of attention for them. And so I think for the government, that was wow, we actually got some positive publicity. There was, I think, in that same article, some pictures of the beaches there. And so I think that kind of opened the government's eyes to, wow, we maybe have something here that we can get behind. And the other thing El Salvador had for it was it had already given up having its own currency. It was using the US dollar. So most governments are very loath to give up the printing press, especially once they're in power. They want to be able to print money and, benefit their friends. And even the best, the ones that aren't trying to enrich themselves, they still see that as they want to be able to basically print money to do public works. And so they're loath to give that up. But El Salvador didn't have that risk, where other countries would see Bitcoin as a competition for their currency. El Salvador didn't have that. And so we started meeting with we were working with the Minister of Tourism in El Salvador, an amazing lady who's done amazing things for tourism in El Salvador. But we kept pushing on her hey, you have a chance to change the narrative about El Salvador from high murder rates and gangs to the place that's leading the world forward in Bitcoin adoption and technology. And I think they kind of started to see, hey, we don't have much else going for us. This is a great thing to grab onto. And it kind of like snowballed from there. It kept getting more press, and I think they saw, okay, this is something that we should get behind. And they also saw that it was working in El Zonte, that people that were unbanked were able to make digital purchases for the first time, and it was kind of reviving the economy there.
Yeah, it's had a tremendous halo effect because now you're right. Instead of thinking about gangs, drugs, and violence, you think about a tech-leaning forward nation that's now also doing quite a bit in artificial intelligence as well, and signing all sorts of deals with international conglomerates. So it's definitely had an incredible impact from a branding point of view, such that I went there. I would never have considered going to El Salvador before. It just wasn't on the radar. And it's a small country. The only time I'd actually previously heard of El Salvador, interestingly enough, was, in Australia, we took in some refugees from El Salvador in the late 80s.
Yeah, during the war there, yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't tell us. We weren't told that they were coming because of a war. As students, I don't mean the Salvadorans didn't tell us. Our teachers said, oh, no, there's been an earthquake in El Salvador. And it was only like maybe 2 years ago that was dispelled.
I mean, there was a very serious earthquake during that time.
Was there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there were some, El Salvador's also prone to natural disasters.
Yeah.
So there have been those too, but a lot of it was, because they were in a state of war.
Oh,
so.
I see. Okay. All right. So maybe there was an earthquake and we weren't completely lied to then. But yeah, they chose the narrative to tell us about the earthquake and not the war. I do remember we went to a school. So we stayed in El Zonte and we went up the mountains, and we met some lovely kids, and we all gave a speech and whatever. And then I'm like, I want to give these kids some Bitcoin. And they were just like, all right, all you got to do is download a wallet. And then as soon as they saw like one of their fellow students get like, a few dollars of Bitcoin, they're all starting to look over each other's shoulders. How did you do it? How do you download? And it's like, they just learned from one another. So the first 2 or 3 we had to show because we hadn't shown anyone. But by the time we got to like the 4th and 5th, they were teaching each other. And they were paying so much attention. They were very well mannered, very attentive. There was none of that sort of unruliness that sort of a guy like me when I was a student. There was none of that at all. And so I was really impressed by how interested they were and how quickly they were to not only learn what we were showing, but then learn from each other and help each other to get that extra little bit of Bitcoin. So that was a fantastic experience. That stayed with me,
they'll know how to do stuff with a wallet that I didn't even realize you could do. They're like, oh no, you just do this and this. I'm like okay, yes. I'm the old man trying to, I can do the very simple transactions. But it's amazing how quickly they learn. And we actually learned, initially in the project, we thought, well, because we're dealing with money and finance, we'll start with the adults. And the adults were kind of just like, and we realized you start with the kids and then they teach their parents and grandparents. And it's so much easier that way.
I tried to, that was the crux of what I had to say to them. We all gave a little bit of a spiel, and it's like, that phone you have in your hand, that's kind of like a great equalizer for young people all over the world, because you have access to anything that a young kid in the United States has. And, you might feel like you don't have much in life, but, most kids around the world don't have much either. And so you don't think of yourself as being lesser or cut off from opportunities. If you want something, you can lean forward and make the most of it, because, the world is available to you through a phone where 20 years ago it would not have been. And they were just really sort of like, oh, interesting. And then we gave them some Bitcoin on a wallet, and they understood that I don't know if they kept it, but I hope they used it.
They probably bought skins for Free Fire.
Money well spent,
yes,
I'd say.
Yes.
So El Salvador adopts Bitcoin, establishes their national strategic reserve, which is, the first country to do so. And, there's all sorts of controversy around. For some reason, I don't know why it's controversial and people aren't just more supportive, because, I think they've established their bona fides with respect to what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if they do nothing other than what they've done with their strategic reserve, they've done more than anyone could have expected of such a small country for Bitcoin, with Bitcoin as well. They've got national education programs. they were the first country to adopt it, so they broke the ice as well. So it's not really taboo anymore for a nation to consider Bitcoin. So they've done so much, but yet people still sort of look for an angle of, let's catch these guys out. They're not quite doing what they're saying. El Salvador adopts Bitcoin, strategic reserve is established, and then, guys like me, tourists, we're attracted as tourists, and we go there. The economy starts picking up. Tourism is booming. We start seeing some momentum, and progress is starting to happen from a sort of infrastructure point of view. When did you realize, we've got some traction here on a national scale?
I think when they had the first adopting Bitcoin conference, and you saw all these people from around the world that, 6 months prior didn't even know where El Salvador was on the map. We're flying to El Salvador. We're inquiring about buying property there. We're looking to bring businesses there. And you saw the people in El Salvador like looking around like, wow, we have people actually interested in us for the first time. They want to come here. They think it's like a high value to have a Salvadoran passport, which in the past was, kind of looked down upon. Even a lot of Salvadorans were kind of ashamed of their history. And so I think it was kind of all those things coming together, early stage of just seeing it, this spark of hope of them thinking tomorrow will be better than today, which in the past, they had a very pessimistic attitude that things were just going to keep getting worse. And so I think seeing Bitcoin adoption and seeing how it brought that in, and obviously, the focusing on the gangs and all those things, it's hard to tease out what was the cause and effect of the different things, but they kind of worked all together synergistically to make El Salvador into a place that Salvadorans are very proud now to be from El Salvador. And El Salvador, just their visibility within the world is 50 times what it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to my friend Macroscope17 and his 3 visits to El Salvador and soon to be 4th one as well. And he's like, every time I go there, there's a new library in the city. There's a new hospital. There's a new highway. There's a town square that's being built in a way that gives people pride about their hometown, their nation is moving forward as well. So I'm really keen to go back and
I think you're going to be shocked when you go back.
So?
Even though you felt like safe when you were there, I think you'll feel a whole nother level, because even in the beginning it was safe, but I think even a lot of the Salvadorans still were kind of like, is this just a temporary thing? Where now they feel like, no, this is the future. Like, we live in a country that's free and safe. And so the whole demeanor of the country has really changed, and the construction everywhere and the small businesses popping up and the kids continuing in, like going to high school, going to university, all these things kind of happening at the same time.
So what about the repatriation of Salvadorans who had previously left because of a lack of opportunity, crime, and the threat of violence as well? How has that impacted El Salvador's resurgence?
It's had a huge impact. A lot of Salvadorans that, they're in El Salvador, there's between 6 and 7 million people, but outside of El Salvador, I think in the U.S. they estimate between 2 to 3 million Salvadorans in the U.S. So it's as a percentage of the population, there's a huge percentage that live outside the country. And a lot of them have been very successful, had construction businesses or different things, and are bringing, financial resources back into the country. They're buying homes for family members, or they plan to retire there. And so you're seeing this resurgence of people coming back. And the real estate sector in El Salvador is booming. And some people, think that that's because of foreigners coming in, but probably 90% of that is Salvadorans that are returning, that now want to own land in their home country, that want to be a part of that. And, obviously there's some, negative effects of gentrification that come along with that. But overall, it's bringing just so much more opportunity and prosperity to the country.
Are you finding that, yes, the people are participating in the resurgent economy and able to uplift themselves? Or, I guess, income inequality and wealth disparities is a huge phenomena in many Western nations. So I know in America, the United Kingdom, less so in Australia. And I guess that's a point of interest for me. Are people able to participate in the rising economy and make sure that as many people as possible are improving their lives as a result?
Yeah, I would say overwhelmingly yes. Now there are some there's some specific situations that, yeah, maybe people are being priced out of like a particular town because it's become so popular, and so they have to move a little further away. But historically, you had huge amount of unemployment in El Salvador, and now virtually anybody who wants to work can find a job. And so you may have some people that are having to move a little bit further away from their work, but now they actually have work. And so overall, the country is, yeah, definitely benefiting from this surge. But it's like, there's the hometown where I grew up in Orange County in California. I can't afford to buy a house there because it's just changed. It's become, people with money have moved in, and it's become different. So I think you're going to find pockets like that in El Salvador. And that's what the press likes to harp on, like, oh, it's become so expensive here. And it's like, yeah, that's one place, but there's all these other places that now they can go and buy homes and properties. And one of the great things about the fact that it's that it's really being driven by Salvadorans coming back is they tend to buy in the hometowns they're from. So it is being spread out through the whole country, where you're seeing real estate kind of benefit throughout the whole country, not just in specific places.
Well, we've had a similar phenomenon in Australia, where retiring boomers of the last 20 years have almost entirely preferred to buy homes down coastal towns, and as a result have priced out many young locals who had dreamed of establishing families there. So it's not an else.
No, it's a global thing.
It's a global
for sure.
thing. It happens everywhere. People get priced out all the time. But so long as they've been able to improve their circumstances as a result of a developing economy, I think that's to be celebrated as well. And so, like, how many years has it been since you kicked off Bitcoin Beach as a
So it was
project?
2019, so I guess it's been about 6 years.
And where is it now? How do you see it now compared to even just 2 or 3 years ago versus, I mean, obviously at the start hardly anybody did, but like, how would you characterize the progress that you've seen over 6 years?
So you continue to see, like in El Zonte, where we originally started. I mean, the town is just booming. I mean, there's construction everywhere. There's small businesses everywhere. Hotels. Yeah. I mean, it's anybody who wants a job. That the biggest complaint you hear now is from business owners talking about wages going up, which is a great thing. You want to see wages going up. That means that we're at full employment, and so you're seeing that there. But you're also seeing other communities. There's Berlin, which is a community kind of in the mountains that has kind of tried to replicate what's happened in El Zonte. And so seeing that happen there, they've been hugely successful with that. And then our goal this year is to make sure that in each kind of state or department of El Salvador that you have at least one significant circular Bitcoin economy. And so we've been kind of focusing on how can we see this kind of replicate itself in El Salvador and then throughout the world. Last year we did a summit where we brought community leaders from countries around the world that have their own Bitcoin circular economy. So we had people from Africa and Asia, from South America, from pretty much everywhere. So we're seeing this kind of ripple around the world. And so that's really fun, is to see this kind of start from this small little beach town that nobody had really heard of in El Salvador, and now having a global impact. Yeah,
it really has made a global splash, and it's really set the model for a lot of places to be able to do that. And I just think it's been fantastic, like the most unlikely place. And you get the inspiration and fantastic.
And unlikely people. I'm not a technology, you'd think it would be somebody that's, a coder or something. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we just saw like, hey, this is a way that freedom money can impact a community. And so that's why I always tell people, if we can do it, anybody can do it.
So, I always thought, since my visit to El Salvador, I'm like, is this going to be like the new Cuba? When I say that, I mean like from the heyday of Cuba, where El Salvador developed such a reputation amongst Americans, the most prosperous and largest country nearby, such that it becomes like a haven for a vacation, maybe a second home, maybe, the investment community takes a liking to it. Because we saw my friend Macroscope 17, when he wrote his first summary of his visit that got, almost 2 million
Oh, really?
impressions.
Wow.
Yeah, it was huge. It was massive. Like, you couldn't have asked for better coverage if even the Wall Street Journal wrote an article, a glowing review of El Salvador. And he has a very strong investment community following. And so I'm like, could El Salvador become something like, Cuba of the 50s and 60s, where it's the destination for people to take a short break, to have a holiday home, to invest in businesses and develop an entertainment complex as well. Because at the moment, it's a nice place to visit, but it's very much, when I go there, I'm looking forward to the nature, the food, the beach, that sort of thing. And maybe my view is most likely outdated, but what else is there to do? Is there anything else to do from an entertainment point of view?
Well, I think they're really stepping up just the quality of the hotels and accommodations and restaurants, and it's coming in the last few years. It's at a totally different level that, we're always shocked now when we go out and find a new place. So it used to be if there was one good restaurant, everybody had heard of it. Now there's places popping up everywhere, and brilliant hotels too. So I think that all of that's improving. But I love how El Salvador's, they're not just focusing on one thing. They're focused on the tourism, but they want to be a leader in AI. They want to be a leader in Bitcoin companies. They know they need this whole variety or stack of opportunities for Salvadorans, because not everybody's going to be a coder, and not everybody's going to work in a hotel. They want a huge variety of opportunities, and so they're really bringing companies from every sphere into El Salvador. So that's what I've loved seeing. It's not limited to one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that too, and in all my discussions with Max and Stacy, and everybody else who's been there, I guess a lot of people have the intention or the idea of maybe visiting El Salvador, but for some reason or another still hesitate. What would you say to them?
I think for a lot of them, just find a good excuse to come. So there's a couple great conferences that happen in El Salvador. Actually, and a couple of them are coming up in a couple of weeks. There's Bitcoin Historico, which is a new one that Stacy and Max have been spearheading, and you have Adopting Bitcoin. So those are both in mid-November. And then in January, you have the Plan B one, the same one we're here in Lugano for. They have at the end of January. So a lot of people, that's a great entry point, because then they can people are always a little intimidated to just come to a place and what am I going to do? Then they can come, go to the conference, and then they wind up meeting people, and then, plan on staying an extra week afterwards, because there'll be all these opportunities that come up from the people you meet. They're like, hey, you should go check this part of the country out, or you should go do this. Certain people like the beach, other people want to go to coffee farms and mountains. But if you come first for a conference, it just makes it, feel easier. You're not as where do I fit in here?
There is incredibly delicious coffee in El Salvador. I know coffee is a big thing for a lot of people in United States and United Kingdom and Europe. It is truly delicious, and it's well worth going there. If that's all you wanted was coffee and the beach, you didn't want to go to a conference or anything like that, absolutely do that. And then you will see everything else as a bonus.
Yeah.
I was pleasantly taken by surprise, because it was just at the hotel. I think is it Hotel Pura or something.
Puro Surf?
Yeah, we stayed there. And we also stayed a couple of days at one of the neighboring ones. And can you make a coffee? I'm like, no, it's hotel coffee, right?
Yeah.
No, it was really good coffee. And
the coffee farms are beautiful. I don't know if you made it up to any of them.
The what, sorry?
The coffee farms
No,
are
we
beautiful.
didn't. No.
They're at the high altitude, the cool weather.
Yeah.
Next time you'll have to come do a tour.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I appreciate you having me.
No, anytime. You're welcome back anytime.